Hello, everyone. My name is Wojtek, and welcome to the Android Developer Tools and Languages AMA, where we're going to try to answer your questions about Android Studio, our build system, and Kotlin. But first, let's introduce the panel. Ivan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ivan. I'm software engineer working on the Android Gradle Plugin and Kotlin build tooling.
I'm Tor Norbye. I'm the engineering director for Android Studio, and I work on a little bit of everything.
And my name is Mess. I'm a software engineer on Android Studio. I focus on compilers.
Great, thanks. So let's start with the first question about KSP. So what's the future of capped and KSP? Will KSP replace capped, or is capped still useful in some scenarios? I guess that's a question for Matt.
Yeah, I can take that one. So it's definitely, we're definitely hoping that KSP will take over for KAPT over time. I think there's sort of two drivers for that. One is build speed. KSP is faster than KAPT. We all want faster build speed, so I think that's going to be compelling for our users, for developers. The other driver is that KSP is a Kotlin first solution. So KSP works as a Kotlin compiler plugin, which means that over time, KSP will also be able to support Kotlin multi-platform. That's not the case with KAPT, because KAPT relies on Java annotation processing APIs. Now, whether KSP ends up taking over for KAPT is largely up to the community. So we hope that annotation processor developers will see the appeal of KSP. But it does take an investment to move to KSP. Currently, if you're only operating in the Java ecosystem and you have a Java annotation processor with KAPT, that will work for you for free for Kotlin as well. In order to move to KSP, you as the annotation processor developer will have to target a different API. There are multiple different ways you can do that, but it does require an investment.
Right. So just a quick follow-up. Would you say KSP is now ready for annotation processor developers to try out? It's in alpha, right?
It's an alpha, and therefore it is ready to try out. It is not ready for prime time yet. I would definitely encourage you to try it out for multiple reasons, right? Since it's still an alpha, there's still a chance to influence the APIs. So if you're an annotation processing developer, please try out KSP and give us input on the APIs so that they will be as good as they can be when it goes beta.
Great.
Just to add a few more information there, we have also ported our own annotation processor room from Android X to actually be compatible with KSP. So it is a pretty good example of how you can transform some of the annotation processor, like to actually use the KSP APIs.
Cool. Yeah, and actually developers can try it out, but like we said, it's still in alpha. Right. Next question from Anders. It feels like the beta 1 of Android Studio has been released earlier than the previous releases. Is that a new trend, or is it just because of Compose release happening in July? Tor, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's true. I feel like Arctic Fox is pretty late, actually. I think we had, 15 canaries? And we tend to like to have some sort of big release at I/O. To go to beta, though, we normally want to make sure that the features that are in the release have gone through some external testing first, because we have this whole go, no-go process where we evaluate feedback from all the teams as well as external feedback. And that means we can't have any surprises in beta because we want to have already user tested them. So I think we've had canaries a few times at I/O for that reason. But generally, I think this felt to me like a very long cycle, actually.
Yeah. Anything to add from anyone? If not, we're going to move on. Okay, next question. The Android Studio preview release notes are invaluable to keep up with fixed issues and areas of potentially flaky behavior. But lately, they have been sporadic. Can you continue providing those, please?
Yeah, I can take this one. So this is actually an area we're actively working on improving. We used to manually curate release notes by, I would actually go into the Git logs and look to see what had happened in the last week or two. Since then, tech writers have taken over, and we have this automated process where they query the bug database. But of course, they only query the public part of the database, which misses a lot of our internal work from QA and so on. So we're working on a couple of things. One of them is to roll in queries from the internal database and merge those. The second one is to make it easier for engineers when we check in to actually put like release note comments in the commit message and try to merge those in as well. So we hope that this is not just not going to go away, but that it'll be an even better source of information in the future. Obviously, for Canary, since we ship every week or two, we don't want to put massive amounts of work into it, but we're definitely you're going to get a more fair sense of what's in each release, I would say.
Great. Another live question, and by the way, please keep them coming. We're going to try to get to them if we can. Another live question from Adam. How do you identify new R8 optimizations to implement?
That's a good question. I think we basically do two things. One is that we dive into some of the larger apps that we have access to. That can be large open source projects, or it can be some of our own Google apps. And then we inspect the output after shrinking and see what's there. Break down the DEX file into components. For instance, we could be looking at the string pool, saying there are all of these strings. What do they correspond to? Where does it come from? And how can we get rid of some of it? Another valuable source is the bug tracker. So we get feature requests from developers saying, hey, I was doing this. I shrunk it with R8. I was hoping to see this thing disappear, and it didn't. Why? And that's very, very valuable for us. So please, if you see things in a shrunk app that you think R8 should be able to remove, please go ahead and file bug reports. We'll treat them as feature requests, and maybe there's something that will be very helpful to other developers as well.
Great, thanks. And are people able to find the R8 bug component if they go on b.android.com?
They can, and if not, they can also just file bug reports on Android Studio overall, and then the triage process will make sure that hits the right component.
Right. Okay, thank you. All right, next question. When will Android Studio support M1? That's the new CPU, right?
Yes, that's the new silicon from Apple, ARM64. I think we never answer questions that start with when. But what we have done is ship a preview build of Arctic Fox, and I think we're pretty sure that it's not going to be stably supported in Arctic Fox. It was a lot of work for us to get to this point. We have switched out the JDK, all the native binaries. The emulator had to do a lot of work to work with the hypervisor. So, we want some field soak time, but we've made this available in the last few weeks, I think. And it works pretty well. All the reports so far are promising. So if you have this hardware, you definitely want to make sure that you download our preview build, not the other regular OS 10 build, because they are separate. And it's going to probably work better for you.
Great. Well, I'm seeing a lot of questions that start with when, so be ready for.
Okay.
All right, next question. Are there any plans of adding support on Linux for wireless ADB? Ever since the first Canary build of Arctic Fox, we got the feature, but it always finishes with an error, not having latest platform tools, even though they're running the latest. Who can answer this one?
Sorry to be hogging all the questions. I can probably take that one as well. So it should be working on all platforms when we support it. It turns out that the technology behind the pairing, MDNS, is tricky to get right on every platform. And so the way we've gated this feature is that Studio supports it if ADB reports that it supports it. And so what we're waiting for is that implementation to basically be shipped, right? That allows Studio to, on each OS, discover the network services offered from ADB. So yes, the short answer is we will support it. It's not ready yet, and obviously, we're not going to make an exact promise about when that'll be.
Okay, thank you. Next question: is there any improvements and/or growing package ecosystem around Prefab? That's the way to package native libraries. Maybe Ivan, do you know anything about this, or?
I know that we made some improvements recently around Prefab, but I do not have all the information. So maybe there's more in our release notes.
Right. I know a couple of Google libraries are using it already, and we're going to try to, obviously, if we release any native libraries, we're going to talk with the developers to make sure they support Prefab. As for external libraries, it's, I guess, up to the community, but we encourage everyone to try it out. Right. So moving on to the next question. I was having trouble investigating Android Gradle plugin since it seems that the sources do not seem to be based on the same branch on Studio Master Dev, but on Mirror Goog Studio Master Dev. What is the right way for us non-Googlers to track the AGP sources?
I can take that one. So with every version of the Android Gradle plugin, we actually publish sources as well. So one way for you to get the sources for a precise version is simply to download them from the Google Maven repository. So there you know exactly what the sources are, and if you need to debug things, you simply need to open them in your favorite editor and just attach a debugger, so you should be able to inspect and see what's going on. If you want to track the current tip of tree, so we have changed the branch name, now it's Studio Main. And there is a mirror branch that you can access on cs.android.com. I think I got that URL right. So there you can track sort of like the live development. However, if you really need to know the sources about a specific version, simply downloading them from the Google Maven repository is the best place to go.
Do you know if it's? Go ahead.
Going to say, and I think that it's possible that it's a little stale now because, as Ivan just said, we've recently changed our branch names from master to main, and it's possible that the mirror branch from the old master is not matching the new main branch. So if that's the issue, then that is being worked on.
Cool, thanks. Okay, moving on to the next question from Maria. With Art becoming a mainline module, which I think we just announced this I/O, will we be able to use new APIs without the sugaring? Mats?
Sure. So Art becoming a mainline module means that Art can be updated on devices, and so can the Java core libraries shipping on devices. So over time, yes, you will be able to use more APIs without relying on desugaring. However, it's a bit of a long play since, as you know, Art is only becoming a mainline module now. And you can only use the mainline trains starting from Android S. So once developers can target Android S as the minimal device that they want to target, then they can start modifying which mainline train they want to target as well. And thereby they can get access to new Java APIs natively on the device, on all the devices, without relying on library desugaring. However, for the time being, the way to get access to new Java library APIs is through library desugaring.
We actually have a related question, and I'm sure Tor is going to love this one. When can we use Java 15 libraries on Android?
We basically, as a matter of policy, do not make any kind of promises about when things will land. I mean, I wish we could. We're all very tempted to yell out the answers to some of them, but yes, we don't make commitments around that.
Right. So actually, let me ask Mats then, who's responsible for desugaring some of those libraries. Like, how do you choose which APIs from the newest versions you support and add to desugaring?
Yeah, our main sort of guideline is that we want to support the APIs that are added with libcore. So as we talked about, the mainline module for Art. So the things that are actually on the newest Android version, those are the first things that we try to support back in time. So do library desugaring for, so that Android developers that are compiling against the latest SDK can just use some of these Java APIs. So that's what we did with streams, we did it with time. And therefore also the next things that are in line are probably more like Java 11. So even though we don't talk about timelines, we can probably say that full Java 15 is probably still a way out.
And do you take requests for APIs to desugar on the tracker or not really?
Absolutely, we do. And we actually already have a bunch of requests. So if you have a request, try to search the bug database and add a +1 if there's something that you would prefer us to do before other things. And if you don't find it, please do file a feature request. If you can tell us a little bit about why this one is important to you, that would be wonderful.
Okay, great. Next question from Steven. Why doesn't Android Studio generate Kotlin script build files by default? Isn't this at odds with Google's Kotlin first approach?
Maybe Ivan can take the KTS question first, and I'll talk about the IDE after.
Yeah. So for the KTS files, like one of the reasons why we aren't generating them by default is because currently there is still some performance penalty that you need to pay if you're using KDS. So I'm talking here about large projects that have like 100+ modules. It's simply that the compilation time of the KDS modules currently, it is slower than the Groovy one. So like we are working with Gradle and JetBrains on addressing these things, and there has been a number of improvements in 6.8 Gradle actually about the KDS compilation, but we're basically waiting for to be on par with Groovy or very close with Groovy compilation in order to enable this by default, because we do feel that using the same language in the build files as you do in application and thus being able to leverage that knowledge that you have about Kotlin is very valuable.
And I think you've also improved the API a bit in 7.0, right, to work better with KTS?
That's correct. Yes, we have revamped AGP APIs and we made sure that they work well with the Kotlin DSL. So it means that you can write like nice DSL without being too imperative in your build files.
And on the IDE side, I think starting in 4.2, we fully support KTS. So we haven't gone to the point of recommending it and making the templates have it by default, but that's for the reasons Ivan said. But at this point, you know, you can go ahead and use it, and the IDE should not get in your way.
Yep, and I guess we're going to try and make it default at some point if we fix all the problems. Is that the plan?
Yep.
Okay, that sounds great. Next question. What is the status of support for bundling submodules into a single AAR? I'm guessing that's a bug on our tracker, and it's open since 5 years now. Can you please shed some light why it's taking so long?
I can take this one. So thank you everyone who +1 this bug. It is the highest voted issue feature request that we have for the Android Gradle plugin. And it is something that we are actually looking into. We are trying to, so there is some work that's needed from Gradle in order for us to integrate nicely the dependency management, because when you're merging different submodules, we need to also be able to merge the dependency graphs so you can have a single POM or Gradle module file. So that's one thing we've been talking with Gradle about. But we are, like, as I mentioned, we are actively looking into this. As Tor mentioned, we do not give promises when it's going to be shipped, but we are looking at it. We are hoping to address this pain because we are feeling it ourselves. Where we want to ship Android Gradle plugin in a way where we can merge multiple artifacts that we ship and ship only a single one. So we feel that the same thing should be done for the Android projects. That's
great. Anything to add? Tor? No. Okay. Next question from Yossi. Is JetBrains Code With Me coming to Android Studio soon, or did it already?
I think that it works with Studio, but it is a JetBrains product. So, you know, it's entirely up to them which version it works for, what the commercial model is, and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Next question from Luca. Arctic Fox is planned to be the first version to support Jetpack Compose in stable release, or will we be able to use it with previous versions like 4.2?
Yes, Arctic Fox. I think you want to use at least Arctic Fox to develop Compose. What we've done is Compose is in preview support in Arctic Fox, but in previous releases, because of the go no go process I mentioned, we would actually not include it. We would exclude Compose when we got to beta, and it would live on in the next canary. This time we decided to keep Compose in Arctic Fox, even though it's now in beta. So you will be able to use stable Arctic Fox with preview support for Compose. and stable support for Compose in July when Compose goes stable.
Makes sense.
So 4.2 does not have everything you need. And I think, in fact, I would say by July, I'd probably, if I were you, use Bumblebee Canary instead. Yes, the base IDE is going to have new issues, but the Compose support also will have continued to evolve.
Right, and you're adding new features for editing and inspecting Compose layouts very fast now, so everything's evolving quickly.
And I mentioned that the Compose support is preview. That's because it's, it's still a little rough around the edges. We have a few features in there that we even turn off by default that you can opt back into. And those are, rapidly improving. So, by Bumblebee Canary, they might be on by default or certainly in more ready shape than they are right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. Can you tell us when to expect new versions of IntelliJ IDEA being incorporated into Android Studio? I guess this is not really a one question, but rather like how fast do you get?
Well, yes, exactly. This is a one question I can't answer. So we have a specific policy around this. And so we actually used to try to release Studio 4 times a year, but we changed our schedule to match the cadence of JetBrains, because what we didn't want to do is skip a release. And end up far behind what IntelliJ is shipping. But we also didn't want to land a merge of IntelliJ, 2 weeks before a stable release, because the merges tend to be pretty destabilizing for Studio. That's just because there's big architectural changes that we have to adapt all our code to, things that affect threading models and things like that. So what we do now is we try to release, land the merge in the first couple of canaries. So it's never in Canary 1, because Canary 1 happens at the same time as the previous beta. And at that point, the main branch is in a lot of flux. But so, Canary 5 is usually the latest we will want to take a merge. So we shoot for Canary 2 or 3. And I think in Artifox, it was something like Canary 5. And so that's when you can expect the first half of a Canary cycle.
Great, thanks. Next question. One of my colleagues noticed that the mapping files, I'm guessing this is about the ProGuard or R8 mapping files, are being included in the AAB files. That's the Android app bundle. Is there any way to avoid this? Ivan or Mads, maybe?
Since it's a bundling question, I'm guessing Ivan would be the right person to reply.
I'm trying to remember now, but I'm not sure. Right.
So maybe let's say that it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're included, right? Because the app bundle is not really something that you distribute to end users. It's supposed to have like additional metadata about your project that can be used by Play.
Well, it seems like it would lead to better crash reports, if this is in fact intentional, not a bug. I don't know either way.
Yes.
I think it's definitely intentional that it's there, so that the information is there for like retracing stack traces, so that if your app crashes, you will not see that every line in your stack trace is happening at A.A, but you'll actually get the right information about your stack traces. So it's definitely intentional that it's there. I guess the question is, if you can avoid putting it there. And that's why I was thinking that maybe there's a Gradle setting to filter out what goes into an app bundle.
Right, we'll have to double check this maybe after. Next question from Leo. Jetpack Compose code labs for beginners say that we need to be on at least Arctic Fox build. I was facing an error since my Kotlin version 1.5 was causing issues with the Compose library files since it needed 1.4. So should I upgrade now to Android Studio Bumblebee to use Compose?
So I think the answer here is that Compose is not does not yet support Kotlin 1.5. So Compose works with the Kotlin 1.4.32 compiler. So the issue here could be the compiler version. Compose will not work with 1.5, but if you set the compiler version to 1.4.32, it will probably work.
And I'm guessing Compose will move to 1 1.5 at some point. So
absolutely, 1.5 is stable now. So Compose will move to supporting 1.5. The thing with Compose and Kotlin compilers is that Compose has a compiler plugin that operates on the internal compiler representation. So therefore, a Compose version is very tied to a specific Kotlin compiler version. And therefore, the current version of Compose is only compatible with 1.4.32. And then a future version of Compose will then only be compatible with 1.5 and not 1.4.32. So that's useful to know that if you want to use Compose, look at the documentation for Compose. There should be an exact compiler version, Kotlin compiler version that you need to use in order to use Compose.
And speaking of compilers, actually the next question is about the Kotlin compiler. When do you expect Android Studio to support Kotlin compiler plugin and Gradle plugin development flawlessly? The current state is broken mostly, and highlighting is not there as we would wish.
I am not sure if that's a compiler or an IDE support question.
I can maybe try to answer that. I think if I'm reading this correctly, it's about like having better support for the Gradle plugins and the Kotlin compiler plugins in the IDE itself. I think we have improved lots of things about, for instance, when you're using build source or you having some sort of a build logic inside included build. I think it should work, and this use case should be supported. So if your dependency setup is correct, it should simply work in the IDE. And if it's not, it sounds like an issue. So please file one and we can take a look.
Yep. Again, if you don't know the address for the bug tracker, it's easy to find by going to b.android.com, and there's an Android Studio component there.
It's even easier if you use Android Studio. Go to the help menu, help, right. Submit feedback, and that'll not just open up the right component, it'll actually include some information about which studio you're using in your OS and all that. So it's definitely the preferred way to file bugs is going through the IDE. Help, right. Submit feedback.
Thanks, Tor. Actually, next question is for you, Tor, from Adam. Are there any plans for making custom lint checks easier to write and to make lint run faster or on larger code bases?
It was really a promise is not a plant, but I can see why it would look like that. We actually recently published a bunch of documentation on how to write lint checks. I think it's like an 80-page book. So definitely look for that. I don't know that it makes it easier, but it's certainly easier than trying to figure out how to do it from looking at the source code. It still is a somewhat complicated task, right? Doing static analysis. On the performance front, we've actually done a huge amount of work in 7.0. So we've landed something called partial analysis, which lets each module be analyzed independently and the results stored, which opens up the door for remote caching. It opens up the door for doing incremental builds so that it can reuse results from libraries that haven't been modified and so on. So we actually expect 7.0 and 7.1 to get significantly better for incremental CI builds and cached CI builds.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we're running out of time, so we're not going to get to all of your live questions right now, but we're going to try to answer as many as we can using the web tool that we have. Thank you to all of you for being here, for answering the questions, and to everyone listening, enjoy the I/O sessions if you haven't watched them yet, and thank you. See you next time.